Hello, everybody. Welcome to the RIFFHARD podcast. My guest today is John Nolan, who is a singer, multi-instrumentalist, and lead guitarist for the band Taking Back Sunday, who, by the way, has a new album coming out October 2023, and it's called 152. Anyways, this is a really cool conversation because I really think that he's got one of the coolest guitar styles out there, and it's very subtle. You wouldn't think of it because it's not hyper flashy, but if you listen to any Taking Back Sunday song, you'll notice that the guitar parts are always exactly right for the song. You know, no matter what it is that the guitar part is, it's always just right, like just the right amount of everything, and that takes a lot of good taste, in my opinion. So we talk about that, and also some inspiring stuff about how he made it through some of the toughest parts of his career, which I think is applicable to people at any stage of their journey as a musician or as a member of a band, or really any type of creative trying to make that their life. I'll stop talking. Here goes. John Nolan, welcome to the RIFFHARD podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I'm curious. I've actually wondered this about you and musicians and artists who kind of take on a similar role as you, but piano, guitar, vocals, multiple projects, sometimes writing songs that go for a movie, like all different types of output through different formats, mediums, instruments. How do you see yourself? Like, if you were to define yourself as an artist or musician, how do you see yourself?
I think that I mostly see myself as a songwriter, and I always look at almost everything that I do, whether it's playing an instrument or singing. It's all really, in my mind, a lot of times it's just a tool to get the song across, more than to try to. I don't feel necessarily like when I'm singing or playing guitar, I'm like blowing anybody away or anyone's like, oh my God, that's amazing. I kind of feel like hopefully the song that I'm singing, or performing is what's amazing to people, and everything else is kind of in service of that.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I saw in the pre-interview that you said that one of the big drivers with writing, especially with the new album, is asking yourself, what is it that can make somebody who's hearing this feel something?
Yeah.
So then everything you do, I'm assuming, is just in service of what's going to have the most impact?
Yeah, I think that's the goal. And, like with Taking Back Sunday, if, everybody's involved in writing. So, there are lots of songs where my contribution as a writer is less than others. And so sometimes then the focus that you're talking about is, I think, what I will kind of shift to. Well, I guess I'll try to shift to that. Well, what can I do to bring this song to a point that will, make people feel it, and what will help get this song across in the best way possible,
So when you're writing in a collaborative context versus on your own, do you have to get into a different headspace, or is it kind of just the same thing, just whatever is required?
It's usually about the same thing. I think that the main thing is, like, if I write a song on my own, I usually don't work it through like lots of different variations and changes. And I think, like, when I work on my own, I'm pretty quick to write a song and be like, that's the song, that's the way it is, and it's going out there, for better or worse. And working with everybody and Taking Back Sunday, a lot of times, even if it's a song idea from one person, it kind of goes through this whole process, and it will sort of develop and change, and there'll be some versions of it before it becomes this final thing. And so that's really the only difference, I think, is that process of once the idea is put out there, whether it kind of just goes straight into being a finished song or goes through a whole transformative process.
Do you have a preference?
I think it's really depends what I've been doing more of. I think a lot of when I've done solo albums in the past, it's usually tended to be in between Taking Back Sunday albums. So then it's kind of, I feel like after writing and working on an album for a while with the band, I'm kind of ready to just put something out there, do something that's a little less, like a little more just putting it out there. And then I also feel like that if I do too much of that, it's very clear to me I need that collaborative process to kind of help bring my ideas to another level. So I don't really want to do, any one thing too much.
Do you ever feel, when you're working on your own, that you're maybe too much in your own head? Do you ever get that feeling or not?
You like how so? You mean like sort of like over analyzing, yes, or like critical or with it or something? Or
like too trapped by your own tendencies, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like it's been so long now that, of writing songs and because even before I was in Taking Back Sunday, there, going back to high school, I was pretty much like writing songs as soon as I could play the guitar. So, it's a long time and a lot of different phases of it. So I've really found that I'll go through phases where I just sort of am second guessing things and kind of more in my head. And then other times where it just feels very confident and very immediate, like something happens and I feel like it works and I'm going with it and don't really overthink it. But it really can be these long stretches of one or the other. But, generally I think my goal is always to try to like tap into something that's more like subconscious and like get past the point of thinking too much. And I think just sometimes it's more of a struggle than other times.
That's a very crucial point, actually, I think, for writing. I just know from my own experience and from everyone I've spoken to or collaborated with that thinking, oftentimes, people consider that to be the biggest obstacle, even though there is a point where it is handy, like after you've written the initial bones of the thing, like then arranging it or editing it or cutting it up, whatever it is, that thinking helps a lot then. But in that original lightning strike of creativity, it's almost like the conscious mind is your enemy, I feel.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I feel like it does have to almost happen in two parts of letting the idea kind of flow out naturally and getting out of the way. And then the second part is kind of thinking about it after that and saying, well, okay, what could we do with this to maybe make it better? And that's one of the best things about writing with Taking Back Sunday is I feel like I can rely on them a lot for that second part, is where I can kind of like have this idea just flow out and just go with it on my own and then bring it to them. And then it kind of, we can all get together and they can kind of think about it and suggest, it's like, oh, maybe this could happen here and that. And so that's really nice too, because I feel like I'm much better at the first part than the second part. Like I think I'm better at kind of just getting an idea out, whatever it is, whether it's musical or, vocal or lyrical. I'm much better at that than analyzing and perfecting it after the fact, I think.
Oh, that's why power's in the team, I think. So do you have a process for getting these ideas out? Do you have a way to kind of coax that state of mind, or is it something that just happens when it happens?
Well, when I was younger, before I had kids, which is, probably now going back, God, yeah, it's almost like 12 years ago since I didn't have kids. But back then, I would be very casual about it, everything, whether any kind of creative ideas. I would a lot of times just let it happen when it happened. And then that would mean sometimes like I wouldn't really write anything musically or lyrically for weeks or months. And then I'd usually just hit this this next period of just lots of ideas just kind of flowing. So I would usually just let it happen like that. And but then, I after having kids, your amount of time is just so different. You can't, I found that I couldn't just wait around for some kind of inspiration to hit me, because there's just so much more going on in day-to-day life. And if you could get to a point of waiting around and then, realize that it's been 6 months since you've done anything. So I realized after a little while that the best thing to do is really kind of keep a steady process of trying to come up with ideas in any form, even if it's not the most fully realized idea, even if it's just jotting down a line here or there, or recording a little piano part for 30 seconds or guitar part or something. And but just to try to keep it going. And that's really seems to be the best thing. And really now that's kind of the main challenge. I find that if I get out of the habit of coming up with ideas and getting things going, then it gets harder to do it. It's like an exercising or something. Like you're doing it. The more you're doing it regularly, the easier it is to do it, kind of. And if you stop for a while, it becomes more challenging again.
It's like a momentum thing.
Yeah, I definitely felt that. Yeah.
I've thought a lot about the momentum inertia thing, because I also have had these periods of not writing for a while, for months or something. And then it's like trying to restart. It's trying to start like an old van or something that needs to heat up for a while. And then eventually good ideas just happen and just goes. But that doesn't happen so much if I just make a point of writing something each day. And it doesn't have to be like the greatest thing on earth. Actually, a friend of mine was on this podcast. Shout out to Kevin Thrasher. He's a songwriter for lots of pop acts or big rock bands, a professional writer. And he does this thing that, and I'm curious if you do something like this. It's one of the most helpful concepts I've ever heard regarding writing. It's called writing for the trash. Basically, he sits down to write, and the idea is not you're trying to write the best song ever, not trying to write a hit, not trying to write the song that's going to define a generation, actually trying to write something that's going to go right to the trash, and just do it every single day, because that removes the pressure of trying to write something great, but it just keeps you in that momentum. It keeps you in that momentum, and then invariably great stuff will happen, and then you can focus in on those things.
Yeah. I never thought about it in that perspective. That's like a funny way to put it, to write for the trash.
It's humorous, but yeah,
it is. But it's I think that I think it's a similar idea that I realized after a while, is that whether it's going to go in the trash or not, it's just the most important thing is continuing to come up with ideas and to not be concerned about how good they are or how not good they are. Because just continuing to do it is the point.
Was there ever a time period where that concern, I guess the concern with it having to be great, was a blocker for you?
I think there was, yeah. I think so the first in 2003, I left Taking Back Sunday, and I started a band called Straylight Run, and we put out our first album and our and an EP in probably, so it was probably a 2-year span of writing and recording those two things. And Taking Back Sunday had put out Tell All Your Friends in 2002. So really in that span of like 2002 to 2005, I'd been involved in writing 2 albums and a 6-song EP. And after and through that whole time, everything seemed to really just come out very naturally and fairly easily, like almost to a point where I had never really stopped to think that much about where the ideas were coming from, or even anything like we're talking about now. I think back then, if I had heard someone talking like this, I would have said that sounds ridiculous, because I just wait till an idea hits me and then I go with it, and it's always worked out. But so after that, so then like it was time for the Straylight Run was going to record a second full-length album. But at that point, I think I had really like ran through a lot of the ideas that I had. And then it was that point of kind of like starting from scratch with just not a lot to work with to start a second album for Straylight Run. And that one definitely felt, that was the kind of the first time it felt more like a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I think some of the struggle was, part of it was, I think, some of the expectation of like, because up until that point, like that, like Tell All Your Friends had done very well. This first Straylight Run album and the EP, everything had done, generally much better than I ever expected it to. And so I think that was the first point of ever being like conscious of that, like, oh, wow, everything has worked out really well. And I hope I don't screw this up, kind of like, and that's the first time I remember that getting into my head at all. And I do think it kind of like interfered with my creative process throughout that whole second album. And then after that, I think there was kind of a long road back to kind of not being in my own way with my creative process.
So this is interesting to me, because I know that a lot of listeners of this podcast and also subscribers to RIFFHARD, they have this problem, and they a lot of them are not in successful bands yet. They're still very early in their journey, but they're already experiencing these blockers of the self-imposed pressure of, this has to be great. This has to be great as whatever band I'm listening to. And I think because of the way the internet works, where you can see like amazing guitar players. If you want to look at guitar players, for instance, you can just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and just see one after the next of just ridiculously great players, but not just great players, like great writers too. Just like you can scroll and just see nothing but greatness if you want to, and then compare that to yourself and get discouraged. And then also when you sit down to write, start thinking, all right, it's got to be as good as all these reels I've been seeing, which is similar to that idea of, all right, the sophomore album had success with the first one, got to sit down and beat it. I think that's a toughie. And I get hit with the question a lot about how do you overcome that? And so I do think it's very interesting to speak to people who have actually done this and found success with it over a long period of time. So where it's not a fluke.
Yeah.
It's not a fluke. It's been repeated. So to find out how someone actually got over it in real life and kept doing it, I think is a fascinating thing. So I guess that brings me to my next question is, how did you get past that?
Well, I think that I was pretty fortunate, like starting out with writing and playing guitar and singing. I don't even know why I had this mindset, but like when I looked at other people playing guitar and other people singing, like even back in high school, it was kind of like clear to me that like a lot of people were much better than I was, and that I was not going to be able to do what they did. But writing songs always was like just so personally cathartic and enjoyable. And I also felt like I had a perspective and like something that made me unique when I would write songs. And so I was able to take the songwriting part of it and say, yeah, there's also lots of people that are better at writing songs than me, but they're not going to write the way I would, and they don't have the same perspective and the same thing. And then I could also set aside the, limitations of my vocal or my guitar playing and just say, this is all an expression of, me. And I do think to some extent, I think that's true with everybody, is that's like the thing to keep your focus on, is like, what can you do that's unique to yourself? Because there's always going to be somebody who's a lot better than you at anything. And there's always going to be people that are a lot worse too. And, trying to compare either way is, I think, just really bad. So that being said, I think for some reason that was kind of my starting point, my just natural mindset for whatever reason. So then like in that time, like after the second Straylight Run album, I think it was almost like a process of trying to get back to my natural baseline kind of mindset. I think it was trying to do the same thing of like ignore all of this stuff, whether it was comparing it to things I've done in the past or comparing it to what other people were doing or comparing it to a level of commercial success, is to like get back to a point of putting that all aside and just focusing on the fact that I love writing songs. I love making music. It makes me very happy. And I just want to keep doing that and keep that at the forefront of my mind and get the other stuff pushed to the side. But like I said, it was kind of a long while, because like that second Straylight Run album, like commercially and everything, it ended up not doing well. So then it was like I had already gone into that one with this sort of getting in my own way. And then when that commercially was not successful, then it was even more kind of getting in my own way after that, of like, well, now you screwed it all up. So what are you going to do now? And I don't know, it was probably like 2 years of continuing to write and continuing to do it, but trying to get my headspace back to where it naturally was, that until it, I finally got back there.
Why didn't you quit? I'm just asking because I'm sure you know this story. We all know this story. Someone got into a band or started a band. The band does something cool. Like maybe they get on a major label or some cool indie, put something out, experience some success, and then the keep man at the label leaves. Then they forget about them. They get shelved, dropped, whatever, or or they get signed and then shelved, or for whatever reason they have some success for a moment, and then things don't go great, and then they quit music. Like that's the end, and then they look at it like, yeah, it was cool, but stuff just didn't work out. Whereas everyone I know who's had long-term success has had that time period too, where things were not going so well, but for some reason they didn't quit. whether it's hard-headedness or something else. Like they'll all say different things, but I'm curious, why did you not quit? Like, why did you keep going?
I think it's a lot of it is lack of a backup plan. Like
yes,
there wasn't really anything else to fall back on, and that was also, I think, part of why I ended up having the success with Taking Back Sunday that I did. And actually, everybody in Taking Back Sunday, we all had that same mentality from the beginning and still have it now, which is just like, there's nothing to fall back on. We're not like, we were all in our early 20s or so when the Taking Back Sunday was getting going, all in a place where we could have and probably should have technically had real jobs or, a degree in something or, some kind of real life plan of like what we were going to do in a sensible way. And none of us did, because our mindset was just, this is what I want to do, so I'm going to do it. And I think that's the same mindset that keeps you doing it when things are going badly. And, like I remember the first couple of years when I came back to Taking Back Sunday in 2010, and there was some times in that first couple of years of touring where, well, like I know for the other guys, like there was kind of some low points in turnout at shows and stuff. And I was coming off the whole Straight Light Run thing, which got really bad as far as turnout. So it was all seemed pretty good to me, but it was not the best at a certain point, like in their view of like the amount of people coming out. And there was like points where people even told us, like friends would tell us, like, the band is never going to get bigger than this. I mean, this is if you're going to keep doing this band, this is what it's going to look like for the rest of your life, And
because they're psychic.
Yeah. Well, and it's amazing because it is kind of similar too at the beginning with Taking Back Sunday. So many people that just tell you that nobody can make a living being in a band. Like, that's ridiculous. Like it's you're just going to be killing time until you have to quit and find a real job, basically. So, but like, I think all of us didn't have a backup plan. We love what we do. And I think we also, though, had, for whatever reason, a belief and like a real understanding that we could do better, that we could be better as a band and as musicians and songwriters. And that as we continued to do that, the band would continue to grow. I think we all just had that. And I don't know. I mean, I think in those times, it seems sort of delusional a little bit. And I think it easily can be, but I don't know. For whatever reason, we all have that mindset, and it's worked out.
I remember watching this documentary that Slipknot put out in like 2006 or something. So 2005, 2006, where they were talking about their success. And they were saying that they had this mentality among all of them. I mean, granted, that's a lot of people. 9 people.
Yeah, they got like 8 people in the
9
band.
That's a crazy amount of people. But they had this mentality of what they said was, never be that guy, never be that guy, never. So everybody, they were united in wanting more for the band, and in every single aspect, they always held each other to this crazy high standard, to where everybody individually never wanted to be the one to disappoint.
Link, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah. And I think, and we definitely have that as well. And it does make a difference, because anyone in the band has the potential to be that at any point. And if everyone is aware of it and actively trying not to, everyone kind of picks each other up and inspires each other. And it really makes a big difference,
It's this. So I think that success in music, curious your thoughts, it does involve some luck. There's luck not luck as in, oh, you just got lucky and won the lottery kind of luck. It more the luck that the music you wrote happened to resonate with the masses at that point in time, like, because you can't control that. So lucky that you met the people who you met, who had that chemistry with you and who shared that ambition. Like, lucky that the van never got into some accident where, someone died or something. Like, there's luck that the A&R guy at the label was in a good mood when you came across his desk, because maybe could have been in a terrible mood and just thrown your stuff in the trash. So I feel like that's the luck factor. And I'm wondering in my opinion, so I'm wondering, in your opinion, where does luck play in with all this?
I think, like, for anybody in music, or probably any creative field, I think it's a kind of a tough question, because there is always some element of luck and there's some element of really hard work and dedication. And it can be very hard to know which is which, but, like, if I just think back to, Taking Back Sunday, putting out our first album, I think there was a certain amount of luck in that if we had put that album out, say, like, somehow in 1999, I don't think it would have found the same audience. I don't think the timing was quite right for people to get into it on the level they did. And if we had put it out in like 2004, we would have been, just another band kind of in this whole wave of things happening. And there was a certain amount of luck with the timing of that, I think. And then, when I think about the members of our band even coming together, there's a lot of random just luck to that, even Adam, so our singer, when we first met him, the band had a different singer, and we had just lost our bass player, and we were in North Carolina playing a show, and he lived in North Carolina, happened to come to the show, knew people who knew us in the band, and started talking to us after about how, we needed a bass player. And he's like, well, I play bass. And he was willing to come up from North Carolina to Long Island, New York, to try out to be the bass player for the band. And then eventually, probably less than a year later, became the singer of the band. But there's so many things, even in just that set of interactions, with us going down there when we needed a bass player, him being at that show, him talking to the people who talked to, like, so many random things that could have not happened and changed the whole course of the band. And so that stuff, I feel like I kind of will hurt my head if I think about it too much, because there's just like, it just starts to seem like it either feels like there's completely no rhyme or reason to anything, or there's everything is completely like orchestrated somehow. But then I always think about too, there is like the factors of, part of the reason I think everyone in this band came together was because we all had the same mindset, like I talked about before, and because we'd all just kept working at it. And, we all had been in multiple different bands with multiple different people by the time we were, 20, 21, and we're just continuing to stay out there and meet people and play music with whoever we could. So then there's like that factor that is not luck. That's just kind of like staying with what you want to do and being dedicated to it. And same thing with the album coming out, when it did. There is luck in that, but it's also like we were the product of a certain set of influences that we responded to and we followed, and I think kind of like led naturally up to the the type of music we made with our first album. Like it wasn't just completely random that we put an album out with that style of music at that time, so I don't know. I don't know if that really answers any question, because it's all sort of just like, I don't know how much which one is which sometimes, but I do know it's not all luck and it's not all just hard work.
Yeah, it's a bit of both, I think. I think it's a bit of both. I think sometimes people have a hard time with the idea that there's a lot of hard work, and then some people have a hard time with the idea that there's any luck involved, because if there is luck involved, then that means that all the hard work in the world might not yield the result, which is kind of terrifying.
It is, and I think that's one of the scariest things about trying to make it in a band, is that's a real possibility. And I remember too, like when Taking Back Sunday started to get attention and get bigger tours and play bigger places, I would look at bands that were opening for us, or bands that were, I would go see that I was a fan of, and they would be on a like much smaller level, but I would be like, these guys are amazing. And there was a time for a while where it was really hard for me to kind of like wrap my head around that, or feel not like guilty somehow, because it was like I would see all these bands that I felt like deserved much more recognition and to be much more successful, and it wasn't happening for them. And there would be like, this guilt of like, well, this isn't fair, kind of on the other side of it, like we don't deserve this any more than they do. But then I also kind of realized at a certain point, like I'm not helping anybody else out by feeling guilty, or like kind of being bummed about my own level of success.
No, because there's factors outside of everyone's control, right? Like it's not in your control whether the public latched onto their music or not.
Yeah.
It's not in their control either. It's none of our control. But it is definitely a thing where a band does everything right and still nothing comes of it, and it just is what it is. But I guess the question then, it's kind of back to what I was asking before, is when things went wrong for you with that second album, how did you not for a moment think, all right, it's over, like that's that? Or do you just not let yourself have that thought?
Well, I felt like I was at a point, like, so like toward like after that, like Straylight Run kind of like started slowing down, and I think part of it was because of where I was at. And then that was when I first started to do some solo stuff, which I think maybe also was part of like my process of trying to like get back to something within myself that just like wanted to make music and do it for its own sake and try to get away from other expectations. But, like I started doing some like solo tours, and I remember there was like shows where like 3 people would come out, or like a lot of shows where it would be like 25 people in a place that what I thought was going to be a small show to begin with, because it only could hold like 200 people, and then like 30 people come out or something. And there was good shows too, but there was a lot of like really, really discouraging ones. But I do remember getting to a point where, I honestly, my thought wasn't that like I would stop doing it. It was kind of started to be like, well, I got to figure out how to, one, I guess, kind of like recalibrate my life to account for this new low in, in what my income is going to be, and all this stuff. I basically was starting to figure out how I could just shift my life around to continue to do it, but not be relying on the same level of success as before. And then also like how to work, to start working back up from there. So it is kind of a weird thing where it was extremely discouraging and like and depressing at times. But the idea that I would just stop doing it wasn't like that I was even trying to stop that idea from happening. It just didn't occur to me.
That's great. And I think that it not occurring to you is a very genuine manifestation of that no plan B idea that you talked about earlier. Is like, here we go, literally no plan B. It's at the low point where most people would just give up, and that's no plan B in action, is getting to that point and still figuring out how to make it work.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you're back in Taking Back Sunday. You put out some more records. They do great. And here we are with the next one about to come out. So I want to talk to you. I want to switch gears a little and talk about that and talk about actual guitar playing stuff. But, in thinking about your style of playing, I was trying to come up with a name for it or a way to describe it. And I came up with a specific. Like, it's very, very specific. So when I listen to a Taking Back Sunday song, if I focus in on the guitars, sometimes it's just strum patterns through a song, but oftentimes I've noticed that you do this thing that, for instance, Edge does in U2, where maybe it's a simple line, but it's a simple line that is crafted for that particular part of the song. And then the next part of the song has a part that's very crafted for that part of the song. Whether it's simple or not, it kind of defines that whole song. If you listen to U2 or Muse or something, like, there's a lot of that going on where it's not this crazy guitar work happening, but it's also not just power chord riffs and chords just being an accompaniment the whole time. Like, sometimes it does that, but then other times you'll get like these cool effect-based melodic fragments, or you'll get these details. So I came up with the word specific. So I'm wondering how a specifist or something. So I was wondering how do you define, like, do you consider that at all accurate or way off the mark, or how do you approach it?
No, I do think that that's accurate. And I think it's something that everyone in the band is very conscious of with the guitar parts, is that I think we all have this sense that they need to be their own kind of hook in the song. And I mean, I think really our goal, like for everybody in the band, is like for every instrument to be kind of its own hook. I think like at like the best case scenario is everybody doing something that's a little bit of a hook, but it all works together. It's not like a hook in the sense like, oh, everyone pay attention to this and not that, or, they're competing. It's that they all work together. But if you focus on any one of them, there's either like a melody or rhythm that's sort of like memorable or catchy. And so the guitar is always that's always a thought and always part of the process. And to me, like, I always look at it like, so the vocal melody is going to be the main hook. So then there should be something with the guitar that complements that melody, but as its own melody, So I think that's always the goal.
How does that come together? I guess because, oftentimes chord progression, melody goes on top of a chord progression. in your writing process, like where does that part of the guitar line happen, like the complementary hook part?
A lot of times when we're when we're working on a song together, I'll have like a melody of some kind that I come up with on the guitar, and not all the time, but a lot of the time that'll be happening before everyone necessarily knows what the vocals will be doing. So there will be times where I'll have some kind of melodic idea at the beginning, but then once the vocals start developing and start coming into that, I'll end up changing it and, kind of revising it. And sometimes it'll be fortunate that it all works together naturally and the original thing I came up with stays. But generally, I'll go through a few different ideas throughout the songwriting process before the part is finalized. And, and also, like I said, everybody in the band is very conscious of that too. So it is something that ends up being worked out a lot of times together where, like our drummer, Mark, plays guitar and he writes a lot of guitar parts for the band. So there'll be times where as I'm working on whatever the melody might be, he'll be hearing something and be like, "Oh, try this and that and see if this works." And then it will. So it'll be like a collaborative process. And usually though, yeah, like I said, it's kind of like goes through lots of different phases before it gets to the final version on the song.
What's the first version usually like, or is there a usually like is there a typical way that V1 of a song appears?
Well, usually somebody has an idea for the basic guitar part for the song, and that will come from anybody. And it's funny, actually, a lot of the time, like the basic kind of riff of a song is usually not what I come up with. But anybody will have an idea, and then we'll all start kind of getting in a room and working from that point. And then usually like what I'm adding, if I'm trying to add something on top of that initial guitar part, we'll kind of really just start from just kind of messing around, just kind of like screwing around a bit, like, with scales in the key and looking for melodies and different things. And I think to a certain extent, kind of like what we talked about before, to like, it like starts out without trying to like think too much about it and just kind of let something happen that feels good and, is enjoyable to play, and then getting that out and then start refining from there.
But I guess if I'm understanding correctly, usually at that point, there's already kind of, I guess, the bones of the song.
It depends. There's a couple of ways that we write. Sometimes like Adam or I will have like a chord progression with melodies and lyrics. So then the bones are there, mm-hmm. and then it's a matter of kind of arranging it and turning it into a fully realized song. Sometimes, like our drummer Mark does a lot of these instrumental songs where he'll do it on like GarageBand, and he'll have like electronic drums and like full arrangement with like strings and pianos, and he'll put these whole musical pieces together that could be a song. They're usually at least a verse and a chorus back and forth. And then he'll bring that to us. That usually kind of gets revised into something that sounds more like the band, once we all start playing it together. And then, there's also like there's a few songs on the new album where our bass player, Sean, had, like a verse idea and a chorus idea on the guitar. And that was the starting point. That was all there was. And then we all, worked on it from there. And that happens with Mark too, or with me less frequently. And I think sometimes with Adam too, it's just like a guitar part that is good enough to kick off the idea of a song. So we kind of have a variety of these ways that songs get started.
What happens when you're not feeling something? Like, is there a process, or when one person's not feeling it, or just not there in someone's opinion, or all of your opinions?
Well, like on the newest album, before we even like started working on it, we all made an agreement that we weren't going to put anything on the album that everybody was not happy with, that we all had to be on board. Which is as simple as that sounds, it's usually not that simple, you know. And I don't think that we've ever put out a song that anybody in the band disliked, but there's definitely been songs where, you know, it's somebody is really attached to it, or a couple people are really attached to it, and one or two other people are kind of like, I don't know, and it ends up making the cut, you know. And so we decided we were not going to let that happen, and that really made things challenging, because a lot of times what is happening is, you know, that nobody's putting out ideas and thinking, I don't know if I like this idea when they put it out there. Everything everybody's doing is because they like their idea and they think it's good. So then when somebody else says, no, that's not good, and I don't like it, it's not easy. But I think that was one thing with this album, is I think we really committed to that kind of discussion. When somebody didn't like something, it would be like, all right, we got to confront that. And so then a lot of times that, you know, ideas would get that idea would get set aside and maybe not used, or it gets reworked until it's something that everybody feels good about.
It's a tall order.
Yeah, it is. And it was, it really made the process. Yeah, it definitely made it difficult at times. But I also know that it made the album much better than it would have been if anybody had settled for things that they weren't happy with.
Yeah. Did any of that approach have anything to do with working with a new producer? Like, did that, or was that all you guys in advance of that?
That was before we even worked with a producer. We like had that discussion. And we had written most of the songs before we started working with our producer, Tushar. But he when he came into the process, he did a lot to like rearrange songs and like bring these things out that weren't there, or were there but sort of like not realized, or sort of like hidden, or, you know, he brought a lot to the process of taking the songs to that final level. But we also all worked with him because we immediately knew that all of us trusted him to the point where, I think we even said this too when we started working with him, that he's basically like the tiebreaker now at this point. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is like on the fence of something, or being like, I don't know, or whatever, like, he's going to be the one who says yes or no, you know, and we all trust him. And we all knew that we trusted him and his judgment to make those calls.
I think I've said this before, I'll say it again, because I know a lot of the listeners are producers, or are working up into being producers. And I have the other side of what I do is for producers and mixers. But one thing that comes up a lot is people saying, the band I'm working with won't listen to me. Like, they don't want any of my ideas. They argue with everything. And my
Right.
thoughts are always, well, they don't trust your judgment. That's what it is.
Yeah.
They don't trust you. And because, at least in my own experience working with producers, if I don't trust them, if I don't respect or trust, then of course I'm not going to take their opinions seriously. But
Yeah.
I know from experience too, when I've worked with producers or mixers who I trust, I let them be the tiebreaker. And the other members of my band also were just cool with it. It's just like, me and you are not going to agree about this part. I don't like this part. You like this part. There's no amount of explaining is going to make me like this part.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. But one thing we can agree on is that we trust this dude's taste. Right? We hired him because we love his work. What he says is cool. And even if he likes the part I hate, I'm just going to defer to him.
Yeah.
But that requires a lot of trust.
Yeah, it does. And also, like you said, everybody in the band trusting too, because sometimes that'll happen too, where there's, most of the people trust the producer, but somebody doesn't. So then there's always that kind of sticking point there too, but yeah, I think that has to be the case, or else the whole recording process is going to suffer. Everybody has to trust the producer.
So how does a producer gain your guys' trust?
Well, I think usually we have to do some kind of work with them, before going into committing to like the process of a full album. I don't know that we've ever worked with, I don't know that anybody that our first experience with them was in the studio working on the album, that we didn't have some kind of like with Tushar, for example, like we were fortunate enough that like we got this Steve Aoki, the DJ, just got in touch with us and said he wanted to do a song, and so we said yes, and we met up at a studio, and Steve had Tushar as his kind of engineer, like co-producer, working on the song. So that's when we met him. And so throughout we worked on the song like for 12 hours in a day, and like pulled this whole thing together. But we watched how he worked and how he kind of really did just pull it together. Like we would be working out ideas and recording ideas, and while we were doing that, he's like bringing them into a session and like editing them and like arranging things like almost before we're done hammering out the idea that we were working on. He had already like pulled out something that he liked from that and like made it into a part basically. And like so that was the thing, like having that experience with him. At the end of it, we all were 100% like, we want to work with this guy. And then it was just a question of whether he would work with us. But I mean, yeah, I feel like it's very hard unless you get to go into a studio and see how someone does things and where they're coming from. I would be always just, I'm very nervous about going in blind, with anybody, because no amount of talking about things ahead of time can really show you what someone does as a producer in the studio and like during the whole process.
Talking about music in general in the process of it is it's almost an exercise in futility. Like for instance, if have an idea for a part, you're trying to convey it to other people. I mean, if you're just describing it verbally, you're not actually conveying the idea necessarily, because they're just hearing in their head their version of whatever words are coming out of your mouth. So it's a toughie.
It's very difficult to get ideas across like that.
So in the songwriting process with Taking Back Sunday, when you do have an idea that you want to bring to the table that might be left field or might require totally trashing a part that someone else worked really hard on or something like that. What is the process for presenting a new idea?
Well, I think that we've all kind of learned over the years, like that what you're saying is true, that explaining an idea is always very confusing at best, and and then at worst doesn't get across at all, and just takes up tons of time. So what we've mostly all started to do is really record ideas ourselves, or even with some of the new album, the ideas would be about like rearranging parts to a song or cutting out a section of the song and changing the structure of it. And a lot of times I know I would go and take my laptop or whatever I had and just do the edit on the demo and then bring it back and show everybody, this is what I'm thinking. What do you guys think of this? Mm-hmm. So we've really done a lot more of whenever we can, and someone has a change or to record some version of it, or as best possible to show that rather than explaining it.
I think that's everyone listening should take note.
Yeah,
because then you're actually showing they're actually going to be able to judge the idea itself rather than some abstract description of the idea.
Yeah, exactly. It can be really easy for someone to have the wrong picture based on what you're talking about with your idea. And I also realized too, it's for myself, sometimes I'll have those ideas, and when I wait and go edit it together or do it on my own, I hear it back and go, oh, wait, that's not a good idea, actually. And then don't even present it to anybody, because sometimes when you're trying to explain it, you can hear it and picture it in your head. And so you get everyone to do it. And then it's that point where you realize your own idea wasn't the best. So yeah, getting an audio version, if at all possible, is I think always best for everybody to figure it out before it turns into a confusing conversation or an idea that derails the whole process, and then you have to go back to where you were to begin with.
That's why I think it's so important for musicians these days to have just a basic understanding of recording. I don't mean on a pro level or anything, but just enough to be able to demo your stuff and make some basic edits. I feel like the modern musician, that's just part of the I don't want to say required skill set, but highly recommended skill set.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. Everybody in the band records their own ideas in a pretty not necessarily professional way, but most of us are well versed with Pro Tools, and our drummer Mark usually I think now is in Logic and GarageBand, but like I said, he's putting these ideas together in GarageBand that are very intricate and very well realized before he's even showing them to us. And if all of us couldn't do that, I'm not really sure how well we could write together at this point. And and we're also all old enough where we had to learn those things after we were already in a band. So but I think we all kind of understood the value of it pretty quickly. So yeah, I can't even imagine trying to write with a group of people without everybody being able to record their ideas, at least in a way that they could present them in pretty fully realized.
Super old school. Yeah. So we're starting to run out of time. There's one last thing I want to talk to you about. So you also sing and play at the same time. That, at least for me personally, that's just impossible. I tried it a few times, and I can't. And I know there's a lot of people who sing and play at the same time who are not even, they're not even studied musicians. They're like, some people just do it casually, like a lot of singer-songwriters. But I see a lot of people singing and playing at the same time, and it's almost like two completely different things happening at the same time. And it's always super impressive to me because it seems so difficult. So what I'm curious about is, how did you learn how to do that?
Well, I think that initially it was, I think, kind of what I was saying before, as far as approaching everything based around songwriting. And so if I was going to be, a lot of times even writing a song just by myself, I would be sitting there with the guitar and singing the ideas, so I think when I was doing that, I wasn't even really thinking about the challenge of singing and playing. And I think I also started off basically just playing chords a lot of times and singing. I wasn't doing anything usually that complex on the guitar or piano when I would sing. So I think just kind of starting out there gave me just a baseline like idea of how to do it, but it also felt kind of natural to me. Whereas also like the idea of standing in front of a microphone without an instrument seems really unnatural to me and kind of like terrifying. So I think there was also that of feeling more secure, like behind an instrument, and less concerned with the challenge of singing and playing it than I was with just feeling like I had something to hide behind a little bit, But and then I think it is just, once getting that basic of playing acoustic or playing just chords and singing, once getting that down, then it was just sort of a process over time of learning to do more and more, challenging things at the same time as I was singing. And that was, I think, just kind of happened over years and years of playing and singing and kind of like trying to challenge myself, or in the case of being in Take Back Sunday, sometimes being forced to challenge myself to sing and play a part, because it's like, this is the part and this is what you have to sing, so you have to do them both, so figure it out. And that definitely made me better at it.
The process of figuring it out, would you drill it? Like, would you have to slow it down or put into micro fragments, or is it just something that came together by just doing it over time?
I usually just would, I think generally would do them separately first, learn how to play the guitar part, focus on getting that down, learn what the melody and words I have to sing are on their own, and then start kind of bringing it together. And a lot of times, at least for me, for whatever reason, if I've got both things down, then getting them down like together is just, a lot of times it feels kind of like if you're like patting your head and rubbing your stomach or something, just kind of getting your body to do two different things that are unrelated at the same time. Like, it almost will start to feel like just that one part of my body is doing this thing and another part is focusing on that. It's almost like two different parts of my brain doing two different things at the same time, and it just kind of clicks into place for some reason. But I don't really have like a good system, I don't think, or a good like way to learn how to do it. I think I've mostly just like learned by doing it.
You've been doing it a really long time, it sounds like. Start with the basics.
Yeah. And I've definitely, I think, did it for a while, especially like high school era and right after. I think I did it pretty badly for a while, and like in front of people probably pretty badly for a while. And so I do think some of that, at least for me, was the way of learning, is just being okay with being bad at it for a bit, and then that's how I started to get better.
That's wise, actually. I think not being afraid to suck is really, really important. I think
it is, especially at the beginning. Definitely at the beginning, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, if you're very scared of that, you're not going to take the risks involved that you need to take in order to overcome it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, John Nolan, I think this is a great place to end the episode. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to hang out. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is a good conversation. This is
For sure.
very, very interesting stuff. I like this.
Well, thank you very much.